This is my third podcast written during the COVID-19 pandemic as an idea about some films which might be worth a watch during the lockdown. Amazing how time flies even if you are not having fun. I thought I'd have a go at war movies, but when I wrote out a list I found that 4 of them out of my 5 choices were from the Gulf Wars. So I chose to make them all Gulf War movies. These might not be the best known films about combat, but that's the point. They are all worth a watch in their own way. The first film is Jarhead, released in 2005. Additionally, after I'd chosen the 5 Gulf War films, I found that they were all based on real events, and in some cases, real people. The first, Jarhead, is based on a book by ex-Marine Anthony Swofford, played in the movie by Jake Gyllenhaal. It is a very unusual war film since it hardly is about war. The central character joins the Marines, and we have the familiar hard-ass training under the guidance of a master sergeant, in this case Sergeant Sykes, brilliantly played by Jamie Foxx, cast against type. Swofford goes through the basic training, something all we movie enthusiasts are familiar with after Full Metal Jacket, Heartbreak Ridge and others. And then he goes through sniper training, and I admit I'm fascinated by snipers, as are most movie makers, so it seems. More about them later. Swofford is trained, and he and the rest of the platoon are sent out to Saudi during the run-up to Desert Storm. If you're under 40, you may not actually remember Desert Storm. This was the deployment of vast numbers of soldiers into Saudi to push Saddam Hussein back home after he had invaded Kuwait in 1991. So the Marines are camped in the desert waiting for something exciting to happen to them and ruminating on the possible state of their relationships with their girlfriends and wives back home. Dear Johns are received and pinned to the notice board. One Marine who boasts about his conquests receives a DVD of The Deer Hunter from home. When they all assemble and start viewing it, it turns out to be of his wife having sex with a neighbour. She was getting her own back. Eventually Swofford and his spotter are given a job, but will they be able to carry it out? These films are presented in date order, not in the order in which I rated them, but they all have something to say. This one really tells us about the sheer boredom of waiting for things to happen and the debris which can result from combat. Despite the fact that Jarhead did not make any money, there have been a number of sequels. I have only seen the next, and it really had no relationship with this excellent film. We move on to The Men Who Stare at Goats, released in 2009. And even as I think about it, I find myself smiling. The film was as a result of a book on the subject of psychic warfare by Jon Ronson, itself a story written as a result of a trio of documentaries. The New Earth Army featured in the film actually existed, as did some of the characters, just the names have been changed to protect the innocent. In the film, Bob Wilson, played by Ewan McGregor, a mild-mannered reporter, loses his wife to the editor of his newspaper. So now, alone and distressed, he decides to attempt to regain his wife's respect by reporting on the Iraq War. So without a contract or contacts, he flies to Kuwait. There he accidentally meets Lynn Cassidy, who turns out to be a former member of the New Earth Army, which had been set up years before by Colonel Bill Django, played by Jeff Bridges, with the intent of promoting parapsychological skills. The general in charge is convinced that it should be possible to pass through walls using one's mental capabilities, but has not so far succeeded in doing so. Bob and Lynn drive out into the desert, where at a fork in the road they take the wrong turn because they can't read the road signs in Arabic, and their car is disabled by an IED, resulting in them being captured by terrorists. But they escape, ending up at a desert camp where men stare at goats in an attempt to cause them to die of heart failure. The camp is run by Larry Hooper, Lynn's nemesis, and so he and Bob lace the water supply with LSD and release the goats and prisoners who had also been subject to staring. The characters in the film are either composites of real people, or in some cases, real people with their names changed, difficult as it is to believe. I saw this film in a packed screening in Madrid, and without revealing exactly what it was, there was a scene at the end of the movie which resulted in spontaneous applause. And the next film is Green Zone, which was aired in 2010. Green Zone is a film actually about people who were in the Green Zone in Baghdad in the month after the arrival of Allied forces in the city. It was directed by Paul Greengrass and starred Matt Damon. For those who enjoy action movies, this is a killer combination. The film is an adaptation of a book called Imperial Life in the Emerald City by a Washington Post journalist, and is a slightly different take on the action thriller. Matt Damon plays Sergeant Roy Miller, who with his guys are driving out into the city in armoured vehicles to find the locations of the famous weapons of mass destruction. But despite having to hazard themselves, when doing so, they do not find anything, leading Miller in frustration to enter the Green Zone to complain. Maybe the most arresting scene in the film is the man in combat gear walking past people in bathing suits around the periphery of a swimming pool in order to speak with a CIA man. As the plot develops, the most important character becomes an Iraqi general who knows all about the MWD and who is being tracked by Miller with the help of an Iraqi and also by a bunch of Special Forces men who are working at the behest of Clark Poundstone, a US administrator. Their motives are different. Miller wants to know the truth about the weapons of mass destruction, and the Special Forces men want to prevent him from finding it out. When I first saw this film, the plot, the lack of weapons of mass destruction, seemed just a bit old hat. But having watched it again only the other day, I find that it has weathered a lot better. The events it features are now nearly 20 years old, and the portrayal of a number of peripheral meetings at which the Americans intend at removing the whole existing Iraqi government infrastructure are now eerily portentous. The film cost a lot and was considered to be a financial flop, but don't let this put you off. The critics were disturbed or divided depending on their politics, and Michael Moore commented that it is the most honest film about the Iraq War made by Hollywood. Green Zone is followed by the little-known British film Kajaki from 2014. Kajaki is the name of a dam in Helmand province, and the film was marketed in America as Kilo 2 Bravo. It is a true story. A bunch of paratroops from the British Army are manning an observation post on a hill close to the dam, and down on the plain they see what might be a Taliban checkpoint. But it is too far away for them to see exactly what is going on, and so three of them suit up and get down there for a closer look. As they walk down towards the road in a dry riverbed, one of them treads on a mine, blowing the lower part of one of his legs off, and within moments another explosion takes place. They have walked into a Russian minefield, so somehow the uninjured have to remain uninjured and the injured have to be sustained, and one way and another they have to survive. The soldiers left at the small base hear the explosion and get to the site, but it is not over. They ask for a helicopter with a winch so that the men in the minefield can be lifted out, but instead a Chinook arrives and lands some distance away. There is no way that they can carry the wounded to it, and so they don't move. But as the helicopter lifts off, it detonates another mine, injuring Corporal Mark Wright, who was to maintain command of the patrol until their rescue, but who died in the helicopter flying them to safety. They are eventually rescued by an American Black Hawk. This is a taut drama, dealing not with the results of the current conflict, but with the remains of a conflict which had taken place 25 years before. The mines had been laid by the Russians during their abortive attempt to ensure their military superiority during their occupation of Afghanistan. Mark Wright was posthumously awarded the George Medal. This is a small-scale drama which probably didn't cost much in cinematic terms and did not make much money, but is one of the few films to get 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. And finally we come to American Sniper, also released in 2014. This is a film at the other end of the scale, really gung-ho American stuff, almost the opposite of The Green Zone, and it was therefore very popular in America, although the main protagonist, Chris Kyle, played in the film by buffed-up Bradley Cooper, was killed by an deranged fellow veteran at a firing range back home. This is a real-life story developed from a book by Kyle and a couple of ghostwriters as the autobiography of the most lethal sniper in US military history. And he actually was the deadliest sniper, with 160 officially confirmed kills of a total of 255. The film reflects the problems that the man had at home with his young family, his wife Taya, played by Sienna Miller. Who knows to what extent these emotional aspects of real-life narratives are just stuck in there to create a counterpoint to the action. But there it is, and in this case there was a problem with a plastic baby, apparently resulting in laughter at some screenings. One of those involved has said that the first baby was sick. The second was a no-show, and so they had to use the plastic one. Clint Eastwood, who directed, is not a man who is likely to hold up filming for lack of a baby. In the movie, Kyle starts off doing much to protect patrols at street level by spotting people who are lying in wait and taking them out. But obviously a whole film could hardly be based on a man on the rooftops, and so he comes down to street level as well and starts to hunt one of the bad guys. It may be that the publicity for the film was enhanced by the death of Kyle, which occurred before it came out. But anyway, it made a fortune, and if you had chosen to watch all 5 of these in turn, you will have become familiar with the environment, and you don't have to be an American to enjoy it. So here we are again, still locked down in the UK, most of Europe and America, as the coronavirus continues to threaten us. I'm expecting to release the podcast into the wild on the 19th of April, the same day as a massive concert arranged by Lady Gaga, so I probably won't be competing. But if you do come across these words, thanks for listening and keep safe.